Welcome to a special episode of the Comic Book Wars podcast. I'm your host for this evening, Weekend Update
What's up,
correspondent, Nico.
How are you?
Nick, will you introduce yourself?
My name is Nick. I own Key Collector Comics, and I'm here with Nico today, which
I didn't do that well.
Couldn't imagine a more enjoyable way to spend the night.
Yeah, I should let the listening audience know that I'm about as technically savvy as the Amish. So I apologize in advance.
Jimmy, my paisan.
Jimmy is, in fact, technically savvy. We're going to have him do a fierce edit, and he'll get rid of all of my misstatements.
Oh, all right.
Yeah. So,
well, hi everybody. I hope everybody's having a good night, and thank you for those of you who support Key Collector, and I'm excited to talk to you.
Now, one of the things I wanted to let everybody know is that you and I have been trying to hook up and do this for a long time.
Busy schedules.
Yeah, busy schedules, but we're really excited to be here. I will try to do a good job of responding to the live chat, but we've got a lot to talk about that, I think is just really important. So I'm going to kind of go through some of those questions. Nick's been gracious enough to agree to answer some of those questions. You and I both have talked about this separately. People buy comic books for all sorts of reasons. Some people buy comic books for their personal collections. Other people are doing it as an investment strategy. In the same way that people purchase comics for like 401, as a replacement for like 401ks, right? Or stock portfolios.
Sure.
Some people collect runs. Some people collect key books. Some people are speculators, others are not. Some sell their books, some don't. Some people go to shows, some people set up at shows, some people use bags and boards, some people don't. For whatever reason, for whatever reason, there's an increasingly large number of voices, loud voices, who are expressing contempt about speculation generally. Nick, you just wrote a think piece, like an editorial.
Speculators, which is
would you talk to the viewers about this kind of issue and some of the things you discussed in your article on Comic Tom's blog?
Yeah, people have their reasons for being engaged in the comic book, let's say, collecting hobby, whether it is collecting, whether it's speculating, reading. And, my whole thought about it is, who cares, right? Who cares what somebody is doing? I understand that there are nuances to, well, if somebody does this, then it messes up this. So, and that's understandable, but for the most part, it's people that are involved and interested in comics. And the thing about, the concern that I think is always a looming presence is that this is one of the last bastions of printed reading material that is surviving. We're being threatened by, and I say we, as all of us, the comic book community, we're being threatened by digital comics and also graphic novels, because graphic novels, when you look at, if you go to Comic-Con and you look up annual sales, and you see the year after year increases in comics, a lot of that money is going to Barnes and Noble. It's going to the book channel where people are buying graphic novels. They're not, and when you look at the comic book stores are somewhat flat, even though there might be an extra, $30 million in comics over the past few years. And then you have digital, which as soon as there is a company that optimizes that experience for, digital comics. I mean, we've all seen people post like, Batman surrounded by flames, and the flames are moving. So, I mean, there's a lot of things that you could do with these digital comics at some point. I mean, right now it's pretty standard, like scroll through. Is it that interesting to read a comic book on your phone? No, not at all. And it's a threat. So when I say, who cares what people are doing? It's because it's like, the all-inclusiveness of however you want to engage in comics, with printed comics, I think is a good thing because, first of all, I mean, or maybe that's second or third of all, but comic books have been around for a long time. People have been collecting them as investments for a long time. They've been speculating for a long time. This is part of the hobby. It's part of the hobby. And I was not, I say it all the time. I'm not a seller. I never sold comic books. I never.
Well, you sold one book, right?
I sold one book. I sold The Walking Dead, and I regretted it ever since. I wish that I had The Walking Dead #1 in my collection still, and it bums me out a little bit. I mean, I'm not going to go out and spend $1,200 on it, but it's something that I bought off the shelf. I bought 1, 2, and 3 at the same time. I read about it in Wizard that it was really good. I remember this, and I went to this little comic book store in the suburbs of Chicago, and I saw they had #3, and then I looked behind it, #2, and I looked behind it, #1, and I was like, oh my God, yes. I mean, at that point, it was worth I think it was already worth $100, but.
Do you think there's a particular disadvantage that you faced by not being somebody who sells books? I mean, certainly there's an advantage. You have credibility that anybody who's actively engaged in the sale of comics doesn't have, because they just lack objectivity. Whether they would like to pretend that they do have objectivity, at the end of the day, I'm going to be partial to the books that I'm buying, right? But do you think that there's a disadvantage that you've had to address by not having a history of selling comics?
I think that there were in the beginning, well, let's maybe not so much in the beginning, because in the beginning it was just, you could search title, you could search character, and then you could search a couple of categories, but it was not, there wasn't hotkeys. There wasn't the spec deck. There wasn't future keys, all the different, I think there's like 15 different categories that are now subscriber categories. And the reason why they're subscriber categories is because it costs money to make and maintain an app. And this is partial, $2 a month. It takes a lot of subscribers to continue that sort of maintenance and development. So the reason why, and the way that I justified it, the way that, I thought that this was something that would make sense to everybody, and it seems to be making sense to everybody, is that these categories have a purpose to either build more value into your collection or to help you make money. So they have that direct relation to one another, so that the subscriber categories make sense. Otherwise, all the other categories that are free and the entire database that is free is far more content than the subscriber categories. And it's really meant to be educational and entertaining. But to your question, not selling, did it cause a problem? In the beginning, I think when I started doing the whole key issue alerts and stuff, I wasn't, it took me a little bit of time to become, it wasn't so much aware, but really figure out what this aspect of the app was, which is.
And you would, I mean, my observation is kind of like, not only did you not realize this app that you created, right? Like, you're the guy who, has created this thing that you're not real familiar with. I mean, it's like, I don't know how to be 39 years old. I've never been 39 years old before. You know what I mean? Like, you create this
one day.
Well, no, I mean, I'm 39 now. Like, I have no experience
right.
at being that age, right? Like, I can look back and say, oh, well, there's that learning process.
Sure.
You've never created this app before. You created it, and you're kind of learning as you go. And similarly,
dude, I worked for a liquor company. I mean, I was a sales manager at a liquor company, and I was in the basement of a used bookstore because the guy had a ton of comic books down there, and I was going through these books one day, and I was like, and there were 50,000 comics down there, and I was like, well, I wish there was some resource that I could look at and just know which ones were the key books. Because the way that I look at it, the way that I look at comic books, and I've been collecting since I was 9. I've been reading and collecting since I was 9. The first book that I read. Well, actually, it was a novelization of the Batman movie. That's what like got me into it. But
Nice.
then I got The Dark Knight Returns, and that was the first. So I'm like 10 now, and I'm reading The Dark Knight Returns. I'm like, this is cool, I think. But going through all these boxes and then, you know, realizing later on, like, oh, this is some obscure book. And I know I saw it yesterday when I was going through that box. I don't know where it is now among all these comic books. I wish that I had, you know, saw it then. And in part of the deal, I was, you know, with this guy that I was helping out. He had this, you know, he worked for a bookstore. He owned a bookstore and he sold antique books, but he didn't know anything about comics. So I'm like, pay me in comics and I will pull out the keys. Just give me like a credit for the time that I put in so that I, you know, we can sort of do this exchange. So while I was down there, I had this idea and I was like, as a collector, I want it. I want to see a resource that gives me the Cliff's Notes of Overstreet, that gives me the history of comic books, how these characters and these universes developed since 1939. You know, I mean, we're talking about, and think about being a new comic book collector coming into comic books today, trying to get into it.
Yeah,
you know,
I'm sorry to interrupt you,
80 plus years of comic book
I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Go ahead.
But I want to clarify. So when you create the app, you're creating it for new collectors more so than, you know, savvy experienced collectors. Is that fair to say?
Well, you know, I think when I first started, it was, you know, more of just, I didn't think of it that way. I thought of it more as like an educational resource, because it doesn't matter. There's over 16,000 individual issues in Key Collector. And, you know, I know that some people say, oh, you know, that's not a key. Well, it might not be a key to you, but, you know, this is not for one person. This is not for me as a collector. This isn't what I want in it. This is to service a lot of different collectors and things that are coming out next week. There might be some issues that are in there that are, you know, someone might say, well, that's not a key. Well, we don't know yet. We don't know if, you know, this independent book is going to be the next saga. We don't know. So, you know, you like to give people information that is more distilled than the crazy massive amount of information that's out there. And then, you know, there's some decisions are made from that point going forward when they're in the store. But look, I get emails all the time from new people that are coming back into comics, and store retailers, seasoned collectors.
You're the retailer's best friend. There's no question about it. They should literally.
You know, I think a lot of retailers
they should
don't
pay
know
for people in their stores to buy your service.
I think so. You know, I mean, it allows people to, you know, discover what they want. I mean, that's really the main point of it. But yeah, I would think that retailers should say, hey, there's this app, Key Collector, and it has a bunch of things that you might not know about, so that, you know, you can pick up or find what you actually want. There's so much stuff that I didn't know existed in that throughout this research process, that I'm like, it just makes the hobby more layered and more rich and more fun, just knowing there's all these like little gems, all these little things that have happened over the course of 8 decades. I mean, it's fascinating and it's fun.
Before I lose a couple of ideas, one, so, you know, we talked about this, like, I think clearly, you know, you don't really know how to use your app once you create it, right? Like, you have no experience doing that. Similarly, when you first create it, people don't know how to use your app, right? I mean, they just don't. You've done instructional videos trying to help educate people, like, this is how I think the app is best used. And that's kind of developed and matured over time. No question about it. And so I think the thing that's been like the most contentious, you know, where everybody seems to have a real hard and fast opinion, are the key alerts. And
right. Yeah. Good
point. You talk a little bit about, you know, sort of like the process and development for
well, thank you. You know,
how that goes, what you're thinking about, like, you know, initially what your thought process was when you were given the key alerts, how that's matured over time, and some of the criteria that you use before you send out those key alerts. Because I'll be honest, I don't get as many as I used to, I don't think.
Right. You know, a lot of times I would send out a key alert if there was something that was speculation, or if there was something that was kind of a little hazy, or maybe, you know, just through time over the past year, it has definitely become more refined. I mean, everything has become more refined except for the design of the app, which we're working on now. We're working on that user experience piece so that it's more manageable. I mean, right now there's what 70 categories that are just sort of each individually there. I mean, it's fun, but it's not that you can't really navigate it that well. So the key issue alerts, you know, it's definitely not, it never was intended that, hey, you get alert, you got to buy this. That's the whole thing about what Key Collector is not a suggestion or hey, you have to get this. It's not something to create some sort of fast, actionable, I got to buy this. It is purely communicating information as well as we can. And, you know, me and the app and, you know, whoever, there's a lot of people that contribute in a way. Yeah.
Can you talk about that? Because, you know, you've got a pretty complicated network that I think is growing of people who at least communicate with you about developments both in Hollywood. I'm continually stunned by the scoops that you get. And then also, yeah, I mean, then also you're getting contributions from collectors, right? I mean, people that have retail shops, individual speculators that are either reaching out to you or meet you.
Yeah, like today I got an email from someone who owns a shop that said, hey, there's a recall on this Bloodshot #1 blank sketch because there was a problem with the paper. So, you know, I put that in the app. So for next week, when people are looking for this, they know, well, this is recalled. Is it going to be something that is worth money? Well, Valiant fans are rabid in what they collect and they love the exclusive stuff.
That's an understatement.
You're right. But is this going to be worth money? That's not my decision. That's not, you know, that's not something that I put out into the community that this is going to be worth money. If you have Key Collector, if you know, the key issue alerts, there's never anything that says you got to buy this now. It's information communication.
Kind of getting back to
and real quick though, Nico, sure. You asked about you know, people in the industry that you know, give information. There's, you know, in sales, my whole life, it's just knowing that, you know, if you call somebody or if you ask or if you develop relationships with people who want to help you grow because they see something that you're doing is good for their industry, then developing that relationship, you have to be somewhat, you know, you have to put yourself out there, pick up the phone and, you know, make a few phone calls. And that's really how it happened. You know, Alex Ross, Neil Adams, like I called the numbers that are associated and then network my way over to them through the people that, you know, that are the gateways. So yeah, it's great. It's a crazy thing to have, you know, these growing up and reading books that had, you know, Alex Ross's art, Neil Adams's art, and then now you're talking to them and it's like, what the hell am I doing here? What am I doing here? But it's fun.
Well, I want to talk a little bit about this speculative market, as people kind of have described the modern comic market, and that's used as kind of a derogatory term. Incidentally, every once in a while we get a mic fallout. If you see me jump backwards, that's simply because like your mic goes haywire. I don't know what that's about. It's come back. I hope it doesn't. Yeah, we'll find out how that goes. But
sorry, guys, if my mic is going haywire,
if it does it substantially, I'll let you know. But I just didn't want you to think that was in response to something you were saying where I fall out of my seat.
I didn't notice it.
Inner ear damage. But again, so like people talk about the current comic market as a speculative market or a bubble market. I tend to refer to it as a bull market. And they've likened it to the comic market of the 1990s with the gimmicks and so forth. You sort of addressed that in the article that you wrote for Tom's blog.
Right.
I think, can you talk a little bit about what you see as the difference between the market in the 1990s and the current comic market?
I mean, there's really not much of a comparison. I mean, you have first of all, you have the history of knowing what occurred in the 90s. I think a lot of retailers who survived it understand, hey, we're not going to order 1,000 books because we think that people are going to come in and buy them because there's the publishers are saying that there's the speculation is hot on this. I mean, I think to a degree that is the case, but I think that a lot of retailers are a lot more shrewd about what they produce in inventory.
Well, the difference between 500,000 and 1 million comics sold, and right, as a result of a book getting pumped up in the 1990s compared to what, 40,000 copies of every single print of Once and Future #1. Not much of a comparison. That being said, you would agree with me that we're in a bull market?
I mean, well, so just getting back to how the differences between the 90s and right now. Yes, and I think there is a lot of speculation, but I don't think that's very unnatural. I think that it happens a lot. The conversation might be more intense, but so back in when X-Force #1 was published, there were 5 million copies that were published. That was the print run on X-Force. Now, when you look at, again, Comic-Con, and if you add up all of 2018, the #1 book from each month, the top ordered book by retailers, you get 2.86 million for the entire year of the #1 books ordered that month. And that includes half a million of Action Comics 1000. So there's a tenth of the books that are being really, I mean, take Action out. You're at half the print run for the whole year, or let's say comic book orders, not print runs, because we know there's a difference between Comic-Con orders and print run. But then you have a global marketplace. You got eBay, you have a lot of places that can buy and sell online, and you have an increasingly interested global audience because of the movies. Which, are the movies affecting readership in a negative way? Probably somewhat, because you're not really you could get the stories, on the big screen. You could go to, and maybe you're not as interested. That was something that a retailer expressed to me when I was like, why is there such a disparity between the amount of revenue generated in movies and how much the comic book print industry is growing? And, one of the things that he said, which made sense, was, well, a lot of people are just, if they want their superhero fix, or if they're interested in, in that genre, they could read it, they could watch it. Is that true? I don't know.
Well, it's a back issue driven market these days too, for me at least. I mean, I don't know that television or film necessarily pushes new sales, but it sure as hell pushes back issues.
Yeah, and
I mean, I think, and right, because I mean, if I'm coming back into the comic market, because I was a collector in the 90s or the 80s or the 2000s or whatever, and that's because I get hooked again from either a television show or a film, I'm probably not going to pick up, this week's Action Com, whatever it may be, Moon Knight. I'm going to go for that Moon Knight #1, probably, because I'm not necessarily trying to pull the trigger on Werewolf by Night 32 just yet.
Right. Yeah,
but I dip into the back issue market after watching that TV show. I think before I go to monthly books. That being said, I think a lot of the people who are apprehensive about the state of the current market suggest that the comparison is more about kind of like the emotions that are driving speculative purchases, store variants, ratio incentives, the hot book of the week gimmick kind of nonsense.
Right.
And sure, it's there, but for me, I don't see that doing anything other than potentially crashing those areas of the market. And a lot of people make a pretty shrewd observation that, when new collectors get burned on books, they become resentful and they don't want to buy books. So I
mean,
really think
if you jump into the game, I think that's just part of it. I think we've
Yeah,
all
but
experienced that, and it's a
No
learning
doubt.
experience to hey, I mean, you're not going to win every time, and you're not going to get rich off of comic book reselling. As we said earlier, I that's why I think that a lot, when there's
It's a labor of love.
criticism, well, it's a labor, right? You hopefully, I mean, I imagine that. I think that everybody that even if they're just straight speculators, I think that there's an interest in comic books on their part. It's just something it's something that we grew up with, that we love, that we can sort of put an adult spin on and say, you know what, I'm making money. I'm making investments. I'm making some money on this, and that's an adult thing to do, right? That's responsible. But also, comic books are $4, $5 these days, which is like insane. And so, can you fault somebody for flipping it? Let's say they want to collect a certain book that might be out of the price range. Let's say they have a $20, $30 a week reading habit. And if they flip a couple books to pay for that, or even if they're flipping books because they have, they're sending their kid to college. I mean, I think that's a reason to celebrate this hobby as something that delivers in a lot of different ways. Entertainment. It helps people financially in some respect. People that lose in the spec game, it's part of it. And I mean, I know that some people say, oh, that's the key issue alert that went out. Well, the key issue alert is information. We don't know how the market is going to respond to something, but it's information that is relevant in that moment, that it's relevant. And it's really supposed to be fun. If you're speculating and you're getting very emotional or you can't afford it, I don't recommend anybody that can't afford to purchase a book and go, oh, you know what? That didn't turn out. I don't know how I'm going to pay the electric bill. I wouldn't recommend it.
Recommend somebody gambling.
Exactly.
Their rent money, right?
Exactly.
I mean,
and hopefully you buy what you like.
It's as much gambling as the stock market is gambling.
Exactly. And
perhaps more so. I mean, one of the things I talk about is that the difference between investing in comics and investing in stocks is that there's at least rational players in the stock market, by and large. There are not rational players in the comic book market. I mean, it's an emotionally driven passion project, right? Like I described it as a labor of love. I mean, people are like emotionally invested in art and story. It doesn't get more emotional than that. So
and it's great, and it's a great thing to be a part of.
And trying to predict how things are going to work out, that's much more complicated, right? I mean, it's much more complicated than the stock market, trying to predict what the emotional response of people is going to be to story and art, to characters and rare pieces of history, at least in the back issue market, or with new unexplored stories and really unexplored art. I mean, you get to see the covers sometimes, maybe the majority of the time, now that DC started releasing their cover Bs, but still, it's not like you get to see what's on the internal pages. Now, before we I just belabor these kinds of dead points, I do want to talk about this.
Sorry, guys, I'm sure this isn't that crazy interesting, and
I got a feeling it's more interesting
Nico's
for our readers than or our listeners than you would think. But there's a lot of Sunday morning quarterbacks when it comes to content creation, whether it's people being angry at CBSI, trends, facts, comic book Tom, Comic Jim. I
Jim
mean,
Comics.
Jim Comics. I don't know these
Yeah.
people's names. Some of them won't even let me in their groups.
Oh, come on. Let Nico
Brian. No, I'm just kidding. But legitimately, like, there's a lot of Sunday morning quarterbacks, right? Everybody's got fucking hypercritical about this, that, or the other. And, you know, I feel, correct me if you disagree, that more experienced collectors have a duty to shepherd newer collectors. And that's really what content creators should be doing. And I think the vast, vast majority of them are. They're trying to help people find the books that they want, make a little money, you know, if they can, selling these books, make shrewd investments. You know, the examples that people have used of pump and dump schemes or whatever are so few and far between. You know, as somebody who just got back into comics a little more than a year ago, it's not something that really concerned me. On the other hand, I was kind of like mortified at how angry everybody was at one another. Not really a sense of community. Nobody really, you know, right? Like my buddy Gary gets screamed and yelled at for no reason whatsoever.
Is that the guy that collects Viking comics? Is that the one that you're telling me
no,
about?
I have that buddy Gary
Yeah.
is my best friend. I'm talking about Gary Nusser, who
okay.
He's the only guy that contributes to his MeWe group. He puts out nothing but good spec, reads more comics than any person I've seen in my entire life. Like, why would you say something negative about that kind of, you know what I mean? And like the examples go on. He was just the name I saw in the live chat.
Hello, Gary.
Right. And, you know, I'm just thinking, like, the list goes on. So these guys are out there, like yourself, investing time, and time is money. Sometimes investing money really as a labor of love. And, you know,
well, I mean, people are, you know, that's part of the concern in a sense. You know, there's a lot of people that say, oh, well, you know, this is going to hurt comic books. But I do feel that, you know, there's a lot of negativity out there within some of these groups and these communities. And I'm not saying anybody in particular, but, you know, imagine being somebody that's new, that's coming into comics, and you ask a question.
And you mean the CGC boards aren't positive or helpful?
Oh, gee. I mean, well, yeah, you have this. Look,
they're like the angriest people I've ever met in my entire life. They're like every meme about, you know, like generation whatever. That's just brutal.
Yeah, I mean, when I first started promoting Key Collector, I didn't, you know, I was never a real big Facebook person or Instagram or anything social media. So I came in and I was, you know, just put it out there. Hey, here's a free app. Here's it's an app, and people were understandably getting annoyed by that, which now I understand. But then I didn't know that was an issue with.
It becomes really personal too, right? Like, I mean, these guys,
it does get personal.
Like,
right.
like these guys have like personal feuds with one another in a way that
it's dark.
Engage in some really dark behavior. Yeah, I mean, it just astonished me. I'm a little jealous for the people that got to enjoy it, kind of like the heyday of Hangouts and Google Plus, and you know what I mean. Like, people talk about it like it was the glory days, and I was lucky enough to be on the CGC boards back in the day when, again, it was just kind of like the glory days of comic speculation and comic news on the CGC boards. But coming back in, you know, like just a little more than a year ago, and there's just a lot of animosity from a lot of different people and a lot of different.
You know, I don't understand it. I know, you know, people get upset. You know, there's some of the things that they get upset about with one another. I don't know. There's a lot of cussing, and there's a lot of you know,
not for emphasis, right?
No, so what's, you know, when you think of people that are coming into comics, new people that have a question, and they're made fun
I don't know what you just did there, but whatever you just did caused the mic to explode.
Oh, it did? I don't know what I did. I'm sorry.
Okay, fair enough. As Jimmy would say, carry on or go on. I don't know.
He just says whatever. I mean, whatever. I don't know. Whatever. It is what it is. That's what Jimmy says, right? So, yeah, the anger. Well,
a lot of it was addressed at you specifically. I mean, there were some real personal attacks. I remember you were kind of joking around about, for example, the first appearance of Wolverine on the Unpressable Defects podcast. Oh, by the way, people hate them too. Add them to the long list of people that other people hate. Down. Sorry about that one. But anyway, so like you make a kind of crack about Hulk 181, and that becomes like it became like this point, like Nick does not know. Like, I mean, your grandmother.
Nick doesn't know what right? Wolverine. Nick doesn't know Wolverine's first appearance is Hulk 181 because somebody said, somebody just mentioned like Hulk 181, and I said, "What's Hulk 181?" And they go,
"No laughs."
And then I heard it. Somebody even said it the other day, and I was like, "Look, I built this app. It took me 2.5 years to build this database. I study comic books for 12 to 15 hours a day on average. If you don't think that, if you don't have any sort of, idea of, if you're that gullible, then you can't be human, because if you don't understand sarcasm to that point and bring in, I mean, it's just kind of a crazy thing for somebody to take such a stupid thing and run with it, because it's not even believable. It's not even conceivably believable.
I tend to think that one of the greatest things about comics is also one of the worst things about comics, that it is very much a sanctuary for the alienated, a sanctuary for
here we are,
right? The isolated, the emotionally unhinged. I mean, people get into comics when they're angsty teenagers.
I think the internet is somewhat more, it's kind of aligned with that.
But I mean, but it creates, unfortunately, I mean, I don't know that we necessarily have the most like emotionally well balanced community, right? Like we're not quite like I don't know, human gladiators, but sometimes we take on the form of like emotional gladiators online with,
what,
and I wish it wasn't like that.
I really think it's a small percentage of people that have that sort of negative vocalization of all these things, but by and large, man, I mean, there's a lot more positivity that I come across that comes my way. And then I hear on the outskirts, someone will say, "Hey, this guy was saying this," or "that guy was saying that." And it's like, you know what? To me, it's just somebody that is trying to promote themselves.
Well, nobody's tallying your victories. Let's be honest about that one, big guy.
Well,
right? Hey, I mean, nobody gives a shit about how many times you've been dead on about speculation, or about a movie getting made, or about some sort of like news scoop that you got ahead of everybody else, but are really focused on the times that you weren't 100% right. What I want to do is talk about a couple of the things that you got 100% right, because everybody else wants to talk about the African-American girl on Action Comics or this new Scream book.
And by the way,
very obsessed about those two books.
It's crazy. I mean, it's crazy. And I will address that right now.
First and foremost, it's not really worth my time. I don't know that it's necessarily worth yours.
That's very nice of you, but I'm sure it's being said quite a bit. And you want
to talk about it, dude? It's your forum.
I'll just say that a lot of people it's all about misinformation, right? That people get upset about, which is understandable, misinformation. But what I hear all the time is, you sent an alert about Naomi or Sleeper, but that is misinformation, because it was never an alert. So the Naomi thing was speculation. It was speculation. And speculation by name is something that is not 100%. So and speculation, by the way, is meant to be fun. From the perspective of the app, there are some things that seem like they could be long shots, because they are, but they make sense in it being a long shot. But again, a lot of this stuff is researched to the best of the ability that we have given to us. Like Sleeper, for example, I got a description and a page. Usually I get a few people that send me what's going on. Spoilers.
Do you mind if
and I'm able to look at each one. What's that?
Do you mind if I ask you who sent you that page from the sleeper book?
Oh, I can't tell you.
You don't want to. Okay, if you don't want to tell me, that's okay. I understand.
No,
keep
of
going.
course not. I can't tell you.
All right.
But I get, but that was one situation where
that was another mic explosion.
Oh, sorry. I don't know what it is. I don't know. I have no idea what it is.
It's the people from the Area 51 raid.
Yeah, maybe it is.
Yeah.
But that sleeper book was, usually there's a couple people that send it and one guy, there was a delay in the shipment. So usually I could vet one spoiler by looking at another and make sure that they're aligned. So, I put it up and it was slightly wrong. I mean, I know that it was like the word destroyed really upset people, but the image in the description was that. But, in the end, the result was the character reappeared in the next.
Well, the book's down, right? Like if you sold
the book is down, and
you did okay with that one.
The character appeared in a week later. So if the book was down because of that, well, I apologize.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't buy it.
A week later, the character is back. So then you would think that, the book should be back up, or is it just everybody soured on the book? I mean, when you see a second print going for $100, at some point, it's very likely that there's going to be some attrition. There's going to be less people buying it. It's going to be it's peaks and valleys. So if somebody expected that book to sustain.
A lot of people think that you have like a heightened responsibility that, for example, your average poster on a Facebook group or
I agree with them. I totally agree with them. But that's the point. Look, again, and that's why I say it quite a bit. I don't sell books, and the reason for that is because I don't ever want anybody to feel that they are being pushed in a certain direction to buy something because there is a benefit on my end. So that was a rule from day one, is I'm not selling books. So the heightened responsibility is research, is making sure that all the information is correct to the best of my ability. But look at any news organization in the world, and there's information that sometimes there's a little tweak that's wrong, especially if there is, you want to get it to people quick because they want it quick. People want that information quick. That's why they're subscribed. And if we're going to talk about Naomi and Sleeper, those are two books over the course of a year and a half, 2 years.
Actually, I'm sure your harshest critics can come up with a couple more examples. But those are the ones that I remember people screaming about the most.
But like you said,
well, let's talk about what I want to talk about. Let's talk about some of your wins,
which is very nice of you.
I mean, I try to be. I'm like Fox News. I'm not like Fox News. I don't know what I am, but I'm going to try to adopt Fox News's mantra of fair and balanced. We'll see how well I do. Anyway, I like that idea. We'll call me Nico, fair and balanced. My friends will laugh. Anyway, Kate Bishop, you were on it before anybody else.
October, about a year ago, I got word that there was going to be a Hawkeye series on Disney Plus that was going to introduce Kate Bishop with Hawkeye. And that was, I think 2 months before even that sort of information started to leak out. So that was a big one. That was one that was fun to put out there.
Right. I gave you props on the Comic Book Wars podcast because you're like the only guy who picked She-Hulk. Now, did you have information about the fact that the Universal film prohibition on a solo film did not extend to television? Or was that a pick that was driven by the data?
I was told that I have a few sources that I trust implicitly who have been nothing but right 100% of the time. 100% of the time. And I'll hear something like that, which is what I heard, and put it out there, is along with something like Hawkeye or something like any of the independents. I mean, God Country. I mentioned God Country. I alerted God Country 3 months before it was announced. So, Die is another one that I was told, hey, this is already option. It's going to be a while. Transmetropolitan is option. It's going to be a while. And I've gotten to a point where, okay, I'm going to hold off on some of the things that I do have because there's such, there's such a reaction. So then I'll put it in the spec deck, like Transmetropolitans in the spec deck, so that an alert means this information is extremely
relevant. The book's a pain in the ass
now.
to find, for the record.
What's that?
The Transmetropolitan #1. Like,
is
you
it?
Buy them on
Yeah,
eBay.
you gotta scroll.
Just in the wild. I mean,
yeah.
You know what I mean? I'm sure they're on eBay. I've never looked, but like that's one of those ones. Like if I would see it in the back issue bin, I'd buy it. But I'm not necessarily
Spider Jerusalem. People love them. They want to.
Yeah, I'm not necessarily gonna like buy it on eBay, but
but you
just
look
a book I read when I was
a
kid. You know what I mean?
Right.
All right. So Yelena
real quick,
Belova,
as far as the spec thing, I'm sorry, but as far as the spec thing goes, it's like that Grant Morrison. Grant Morrison gets retained by a production company. Then you can look at his books and you could say, okay, which ones are the books that make the most sense? And that's where some of the spec comes in. And then if you look at something like Dark Horse, who wants to, they sign this media deal where they're, giving up a substantial piece of the company. And you can look at a lot of the Dark Horse books and go, okay, which ones have the most success as a contemporary release? And then you start just sort of working your way through that on speculation. And I mean, the spec part doesn't have to be as difficult as a lot of people make it. It's just looking at things that are reasonable. You were saying earlier about, the market, and is the market going to crash? Is print going to go away? They're backed by Disney now. Marvel was at one point very close to going bankrupt, but now you have Disney getting in. Disney's owns it. So I mean, but I don't think that that comic printing is going to go anywhere for a very long time. And as far as the public interest of these movies, because I know that a lot of people talk about saturation. How many Marvel movies have there been? There's been 23 Marvel movies since Iron Man, which is 2008. It's so 11 years. When you average it out, we're getting 2 movies a year. And I don't really think that there's that much cause. Now there's a lot of stuff coming up, but there's an appetite for it. There's an appetite for that stuff. So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to go back to what you were saying earlier.
Well, I'm just going to run through them since you're not going to let me do them individually or let me give you credit.
Sorry.
I'm just, don't say anything. You ready?
Yeah, nobody wants.
You're right about suicides. Nobody wants to hear it. You don't want to hear it. You can't take praise. You're about it. I forget. Like we're all emotionally crippled in different ways. There's people arguing in the chat because they think that their fucking specific MeWe group or Facebook group or whatever was like personally attacked, as if
I wasn't really intention at all. I don't know if
not at all. But anyway, the point is, I sort of champion all these groups, whether they want me to do that or not. I care very little.
We're talking about comics. I wish that.
Before we get into this, it's about comics because that's a point that you and I solidly agree about, right? Like love comics. Yeah. Let me run through your wins because I think somebody should at least for you once, and you won't do it for yourself. You were right about Yelena Belova before anybody else. You were right about New Gods and Miracle Man before anybody else. You were right about Stumptown before anybody else. You were right about the Suicide Squad film and about a half a dozen of those characters before anybody else. And you were right about Dylan Brock before anybody else. And those are big wins.
There were a lot more than that. I think we've sent out,
those are your biggest wins. I promise. Those are the biggest things that are happening in comics right now. They're huge.
Oh, right now. Right.
I mean right. Yeah. And you were ahead of the curve and they're still popping.
But thank you, man. I appreciate that.
Yeah, they were big. They were big wins.
I appreciate that. And by the way, nothing was directed at any MeWe group or Facebook group. The bottom line is, I mean,
I have friends in all of these groups, right?
Yeah.
It's ridiculous I think it's ridiculous that they argue with one another, that it becomes very personal.
It is. I mean, because
it breaks my heart.
It would be nice if I've I mean, I've reached out to people in groups since the beginning, people that run these groups, and say, hey, let's do this, let's do that. I'm happy to give anybody credit that wants to contribute and wants to be linked to their group because they want more attention to the group. I am all about it. There's no exclusions. And as far as people saying, hey, the way I see it, when people are saying, oh, this was alerted and it was wrong. Well, first of all, their information is wrong because it was never alerted. So that's something that I just wanted to get out again. But at the same time, it's like, what is the point of that? And it seems like the point is to discredit, which, okay, you want to discredit something, but also like it's a way to self-promote. And that is the lowest form of self-promotion, is to just harbor on something that is, pretty old and pretty, so long. It's like, dude, if you want to self-promote, do something, that's positive in a way that you're getting attention for that. Because look, I came into this with an idea and an app, right? And really, I didn't know one person in the comic book industry, not one. I went to New York Comic Con. I didn't know one person, 2017. But the integrity and the concept to me as a collector, I felt the concept to me as a collector was, this is something that I want. And everything that I'm going to do is in consideration of everybody that is interested in the hobby, and thinking of it from that perspective as a collector, as somebody that enjoys comic books, and go, is this the best thing to do for the community? There's nothing that's sinister in the sense of putting information out there that people can consume, whether they are a beginner or an expert or anywhere in between. It's sometimes, the guys that seem to know everything about comics, they could miss out on an issue as they're going through a long box. And this is something that prevents that sort of, walking away like, oh, you know what? I saw that last week and it sucks that I didn't pick it up, because you want to have fun in this. And if your way of having fun is, well, I'm going to beat up on that group, or I'm going to say something about that guy, then, it's going to create a pretty dark atmosphere for the hobby. You see these people in what are they, Comicsgate? It's like, what are you getting so political about comic books for?
There's a lot of that stuff too that I didn't.
It's all these different subcultures, and it's like, what is going on?
I can't even make jokes about like politics, and I generally do a pretty decent job of making fun of all parties. Without like someone just freaking out, you know what I mean? And I'm just like, whoa. You can't make a joke about anything, right?
Right.
I mean, like, oh my God.
You gotta be considerate of people. You gotta be.
They're still crying about it in the live chat. Jesus.
What's that? I didn't.
There's like a group, but hey, the point is like.
Okay, so why don't we talk a little bit about speculation? You want to talk about some speculation?
I would, man. I think that sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Well, hold on. Can we talk about one last thing, because I think
sure.
This is really important.
Sure.
I mean, it's really important. So one of the last things that everybody was very mad at you about, so angry, was that you tried to generate some revenue, God forbid, for your primary job. Right. Like, I mean, your profession, your calling, your vocation, by doing one of these mystery mailboxes, but instead of
collection injection,
instead of it just being a random onslaught of the books that you didn't want from a collection you bought, which is, I'm afraid, what happens with most of these boxes. You actually had a retailer who was going to do it nothing but load it up with books that they find on the Key Collector app, and fire it out to people, and then you were going to make what, like 10% or something?
10%. Yeah. So I think it was $30 a box.
Yeah. So what are you not telling the public that you did that I found out about, because I got good sources
on Facebook? But there seemed to be some some people were upset about that there was a, and it said in the description of the box set, is what I was calling it, the collection injection, the box set. And the reason why I do those things is not to make $150. The reason I do it is because I think it's a really cool and fun thing for people to get involved in. Hey, I can get 5 key comic books at once. I can't wait for it to arrive, and I know that it's something that's going to be it's going to be a key issue. Like, that's fun. But so people seemed upset that there was a 10% commission, we could call it. And so I looked at a couple charities and I donated the $150 because people seemed that it went against my credo of I don't sell comic books, which fine. To me, it doesn't. If people feel that this is a something that might cause credibility or cause them to go, wait a minute, I don't know if I trust that, then it's not important enough for me to accept that money. Then I'll just, I donated it to Comics for Kids in Chicago. It's a Chicago charity, and it's not my charity, so don't worry about that because I do live in Chicago. But
so you sent part of the revenue or all of the revenue that you were supposed to
send? Yeah, all of it.
Every dollar that you were supposed to make,
every penny.
Ouch.
And if somebody if somebody needs proof, I'm happy to produce it. Or you can call Comics for Kids and ask them directly.
Comics for Kids, which is a beautiful charity. You want to tell them a little bit about what they do?
They provide comic books to kids. It's a charity.
As basic as it gets, right?
It's as basic. I mean, it's right there.
If we
right there
truly love comics the way that we should and we're supposed to, doesn't sound like there's any better gesture than to get comic books in the hands of young people, newer readers, period.
Yeah, it's a great way to be involved, get new people involved, is to and to get them, reading and get them interested and get them excited, right? I mean, this is my commercial for Comics for Kids. You guys can go on their Facebook page and follow them. But that, I appreciate you bringing that up, Nico. Thank you.
Yeah, well, nobody else does.
Nice
yeah. All right. So,
look,
you want to talk books?
The bottom line is the reason for creating this is really an education resource that allows people to be more involved, to have more fun. And I get emails all the time where people say, I'm having a lot of fun with this. I'm having so much fun. It brought me back. It got me introduced. I've been doing it for years. I'm having a lot of fun because this makes things easier. And that's it. I mean, all the other stuff, if you want to ignore it, ignore it. If you feel burned by it, you don't have to engage with it. You can walk, what's like, there's something, I don't like onions. I don't, personally, I don't like onions. So I don't eat them, but I don't walk around going, that onion and onions in general suck. The pieces, I can't stand them, so it's not like, it's like, if you're not into it, I mean, you could talk as bad as you want. You could talk badly about it. That's your decision. But I don't understand. I can't think of any product that I've engaged with that I don't like and then made it part of my marketing plan or part of my group or whatever it might be to promote myself by talking badly about that. Or however you want to spin it. It doesn't matter. But that's what happens. But let's get into some spec. What were we talking about? The MCU? I'm sure I could see you reading the comments, and I'm sure you're endlessly entertained. Guys, I make comments on for a reason. But like I said, if you want to get involved, if you want to contribute to the comic book community, I could be that conduit with the app. I know it sounds like a terrible idea, but I can guide people to what you're doing, which I'm sure is great. And that's how we collaborate. I mean, Comic Tom, Jim Comics, anybody, I mean, I could.
Yeah, Canadians must be rich. Jim Comics moves the needle.
Oh my God. It's insane.
Boy. That guy thinks the comics important, and it's, oh boy, I better sell my book.
He's a genuine dude. He's genuine, and people know that he's not out to make money on something, or he's trying.
He kind of is a little negative towards you, big guy, for having a
He
spot on your website. He's very
totally kidding.
Oh,
him and I
you don't take that personal?
not at
You just
all.
kind of rib your friends?
No, I love Jim.
Outrageous.
I love him.
That's outrageous. I don't understand that. I thought you were supposed to take everything really hard and personal.
No. Jim's my buddy. No, he moves
the needle.
He'll make cracks at me. I'll make cracks at him, but we both know, and we assume that everybody else knows that it's in good fun, and it's joking around with somebody that you know, and it's supposed to be fun, and it's supposed to create that, we're having fun. We hope that people notice that and don't think that it's something that's a negative thing. Jim's a great guy, and he's genuine.
I hope I get to meet him sometime.
Tom, I call him Comic Tom. But
poor Tom, he gets a lot of grief too.
Tom is a genuine dude, just like Jim. He is who he is on his YouTube channel. Think about, because people say, oh, maybe he's doing this, maybe he's pumping and dumping.
We had 36 thumbs down before we started.
I know. It's just like, what? I mean, don't you want to know what we're going to do?
It's intense.
I'll tell you
that's a lot of either robots or just like time.
I invite anybody to reach out to me if they have a problem with the app, or if they have something that they feel. Now, we've addressed a couple of the things.
There's me, you, and 2 mods, right? And then there's I think 40 live listeners right now. So the other 36 people gave you and I thumbs down. I want to thank them for staying. That makes me happy.
Right.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for listening. Whether you're,
wow, we picked up a couple guys. They're back.
And whether you enjoy it or you don't, but Tom's a great guy. He is a genuine guy. I mean, I talk to him every other day, and we talk about what we can do to create more content that is entertaining, that includes more people into the comic book community. We just, we're like-minded individuals in the sense that we're putting out something to the best of our ability, and we're hoping that we can do it for a living, and we hope that we can entertain people with it. But it's not, let's do this to make money. We're saying we hope that we can put together what we think is the best sort of content so that we can make this a more enjoyable experience collecting. Because I remember before I started this, I would be going to a flea market or an antique store, and it got to a point where I was like, Googling this, Googling that, it's like, oh, you know what? It's exhausting. I got a headache. And at one point I'm like, this is when I was really doing it quite a bit, going to these stores. I'm like, I'm tired of like sitting at this box and like, when I come across something that I don't recognize, I'm going to Google it. And it's like over and over and over. So, this is part of technology, by the way, is, if it's something that makes a difference in an industry, it's always going to come under, first, it's going to be disregarded. There's 3 rules. There's going to be disregarded or dismissed. And then it's going to be violently opposed, which is sometimes where I feel we're getting out of that stage a little bit, but the chat might, tell a different story. And then there's acceptance. And some people might be like, I will never accept this. But it doesn't mean accept it like you have to like it. It's accepting that this is something that exists now. It's something that exists. You don't have to accept it as something that you like, but it exists. So violent opposition is part of the stage of bringing something, introducing something new into the market. That's just how it is, human behavior.
Yeah, so hate it or love it, key collectors on top. Let's enough with the comic drama, okay? I know some people really enjoy that stuff. I know you don't. I know I don't.
It's fun to fight every once in a while, but when it's constant,
I mean, but I think the reason that you and I decided to do this podcast was we really enjoy talking comics, and we've been doing that.
When I talk to you, we talk for an hour and a half, and we talk about what's coming up, what's going on. We got a lot of great information.
Yeah, let's talk about this idea of superhero saturation, right? Like a lot of people predicted this early enough at Amazon corporate that they greenlit The Boys, assuming that by the time the Avengers Endgame movie was out, right, by the time that trilogy was over, it'd be a perfect time to jump in and kind of people would be sort of like over capes. And that's not the case.
It's not the case. No, like I said, I think that there's the interesting thing, and you know, look, these companies are not making the movies for us. We're going to see the movies regardless. If it all goes away, if everybody decides they don't like comic book movies and TV shows anymore, the collectors will always, for the most part, go and see see what we know on the page on the screen. It's just something that we do because we love it. But the decisions that Marvel is making, when you look at like Shang-Chi, when you look at some of the other things that are happening, that it looks like that they are reaching out globally in a sense, because we've talked about this. You introduce Black Knight, right? Okay, we've heard that. We've heard in Endgame that there is we heard the Easter egg where they mention Braddock, and we go, Braddock, well, Captain Britain, right? So you got, let's just say that's going to be a thing, Captain Britain. Then you got Black Knight, and then you have the foundation of MI13 and
Blade. Don't forget about Blade. Comes in issue 6, right?
I was getting to that.
Sorry.
So MI13 is a British intelligence agency that is responsible for super extraordinary situations. And then so that series where Black Knight joins MI13 with Captain Britain is Captain Britain and MI13, and then in the 5th issue, I think Blade jumps in, because when Blade got announced and everything else was getting announced, I was like, why would Ghost Rider be on Hulu with Satana with the monster? Why would the monster stuff be regulated to Hulu? But then Blade is entering the MCU proper as a film, and then we've heard a lot about Captain Britain. It just makes sense if they go down that direction. And then, as far as the globalization of comic books, you're bringing in a different country. I mean, everybody loves these movies, but it would be nice, right? If I'm from, Britain, or if I'm from China, and I'm seeing like these characters that I enjoy, and they are, they're from where I'm from. They're stationed where I'm from. They're active in an area that I'm familiar with. I would feel connected to it more. So I think that there's a lot of, and then Black Widow. Like, why are they doing a Black Widow solo movie? There's got to be, a reason for it. Are they introducing? I know what we heard this week, which is interesting, is that there are going to be more people coming. There are going to be more characters announced from the Red Room, from the Black Widow Ops program. So, are they introducing a new Black Widow? Are they introducing the Red Widow? Are they introducing characters that could form another team that might be more culturally recognized by other parts of the world? I mean, we talk about Marvel being oversaturation, but there are so many stories and there are so many characters and so many regions in the world that would love to see like that, a property sort of based in where they're from. I mean, that it just makes sense. And then you start seeing it happen.
I have a friend who suggests that the public is going to get tired of the comic book films. He likened it to Westerns, right? That Westerns lasted about 15 years. Now we've got a dozen or so MCU projects coming out in the next 3 years, maybe a half a dozen on Hulu. It's been suggested that there's going to be a half a dozen Sony Spider-Verse TV projects in the works. It looks like the Joker is going to win an Academy Award for something, whether it's Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor, who knows. Do you see comic book related media slowing down or at least changing its trajectory in the next 5 years?
I mean, for me, probably changing its trajectory. Yeah, I mean, you could see it happening already. I mean, you see what Marvel is now. So they did their big team film with everybody that's come together, and now this Marvel is splintering off. Now that they have control of these different media delivery systems, so you're gonna have the movies, which looks like it'll probably go into a cosmic direction, which I think, I'm not saying anything that people don't already know, and then the whole horror aspect of it.
We think that's going to begin with the Scarlet Witch television series, roll straight into Doctor Strange, or you're talking about the fact that Blade is going to be here. You're going to see
most of it will be on Hulu. I know that they're going to do some horror in Doctor Strange, but that's going to be just.
You think it's all Damian Hellstrom, Ghost Rider, and they just explode the horror universe on Hulu?
On Hulu, yeah. And then with Disney Plus, what I've been saying for a while is I think that they're going to, and now of course it's going to sound like old news, but they're going to introduce the Young Avengers, and I've been saying that since last October, where you're going to see Kate Bishop. We know that you're going to see an adolescent or a young Loki most likely come out of the Loki series. You're going to see Captain America and Falcon introduce a new character, whether it is America Chavez or maybe some form of one of the Patriot characters that were introduced in the past decade. And then what's the other one? And then WandaVision, I mean, they could go with Viv, but if you go back and you look at, or they could introduce, Wiccan and Speed. And what's interesting is some of the clues. Like, I think it's good. It's fun to spec now, since we kind of know a few of these things. It's fun to spec on that, but it's fun to spec on the villains too. Like, if you look at West Coast Avengers #4, there's this character, Master Pandemonium. And if you have the app, if you have the spec deck, you know this. But there's this crazy panel where his hands are babies. He kidnaps Scarlet Witch's children, the babies at that point. They're like these demonic things. But the bottom line is they retconned it way later, decades later. And it turns out that her children are Wiccan and Speed. So they can somehow incorporate that story, which, do we have clues to that? Well, Agatha Harkness is going to be introduced. And in that storyline where Master Pandemonium kidnapped her kids, Agatha Harkness was a big part of that storyline. But we see who's cast. It's some younger woman, right? A younger woman, Agatha Harkness. And there's actually an alternate universe version of her that is younger. She's more, I guess she's more pleasing to the eye, if you're into it. But listen, there's a lot of exciting spec with villains. I mean, who do you have? You got,
Here's kind of the point I was getting to.
Yeah.
Okay.
We can talk about spec, and then we keep going.
We keep going back to these theoretical issues, which I think are kind of like the thing that really interests me. Because I can get down and dirty with books. We'll just go over and pull a stack back there. I mean, I like books, but it's these overarching sort of issues, principles, maxims, kind of like ideas that drive my speculative philosophy that helps me make the decision about what kind of books I want to be buying. And these are the reasons why when an alert comes out from the Key Collector, your buddy George, I know how to handle it, right?
You're George. You should tell people that.
I know what to do with the information. here's kind of the thing that I don't have a good answer for, or at least not a firm answer or a firm belief about. Can the comic market continue to see explosive growth propelled by television and film? Is there any reasonable way that Hollywood can kind of churn out content at the rate that it is, and collectors continue to see that content drive explosive or even incremental growth in the comic market? Or is it a situation where there's going to be so much content that we're really going to have to get down and hone in and focus on specific characters, as opposed to well, obviously they're going to make a whatever TV show, watch the book go bananas, I can ride the upswing, sell during the, you know what I mean?
Characters. I mean, the situational stuff doesn't really, stick. So it's usually the characters that have that, that get that sort of, return or whatever you want to call it. But I think that the movies right now are one of the main drivers of it. What gets exciting,
number one, right?
And what gets exciting is when the comic book, and that's what's cool about, Kate's and, Aaron to a degree, and some of these other writers, is when you're looking into the story, you're reading the story. Hickman, I mean, I love
and they're driving in other words, I think what you're getting at is when the comics themselves are driving the plots in the films and television.
It's really fun, because that's when you're like a detective, and you're sort of, you're figuring out what's going on. Like the Sinister Secrets to me are just like, I mean, I'll pour over that for 4 or 5 days, and I'm like, okay, this could be Jumbo Carnation. This could be, and if you want to, we could read one of them. I mean, I think I saved them all because I'm so like, and there were some that I couldn't figure out, but there's actually 2 that I think are related to the Goblin Queen.
Now, can you talk to our listeners like they have absolutely no idea what you're talking about? Because Jimmy yells at me sometimes. He's like, "You guys talk about these, or you and whatever," and it's like, I know what you're talking about, but that's not everybody does.
Of course, I apologize, and I don't think that there's anything wrong with somebody saying, you know what, I don't know what that means. I don't know what FOC means. I don't know what what it. I mean, there's a lot of what's a virgin variant. What's this? There's are things that if you don't know, I mean, that's what's part of the.
We have our own language, right?
It's nice to have. So if you can ask questions in an environment where you're not afraid of being ridiculed. You can ask a question that some people seem to think that they all know the answer to, but maybe you don't. And there shouldn't be sort of I don't want to ask because, I don't want people to come down on me. I saw the other day that somebody asked in Tom's comments about, they said, what's a wall book? Maybe they had never been in a comic book store before, but they're here. They're engaging in the community. They're watching the video. It's, explaining what a wall book is a simple thing to do. And in some communities, you just like, you get thrashed for something like that. So it's not, so ask any question. If anybody has any question about anything comic book related, you can reach out to me on Facebook, Instagram, wherever, and I'd be happy to answer it.
So let's talk about, you want to talk about the House of X Powers?
What I won't answer, by the way, is this book going to go up in value? Is this book going to do this or that? Because I don't want you making a decision on how you spend your money by me telling you, yes, that is going to explode in value. Because who can know that for sure, that something is going to explode in value? And that's where the responsibility comes, is I am going to pass this information to you that's coming to me from Marvel press releases, DC press releases, people in the industry that I have become friends with, and they understand the positive aspect of the app, and also a lot of information that I funnel to people that are using the app, because there's a lot of people with a lot of great information out there, with a lot of good spec, with a lot of good, but there's a percentage of it that goes out because it gets digested now And then, is this something that makes sense? Does it make sense to talk about the Caretaker Chronicles, the Ghost Rider, having, with Ghost Rider's new upcoming series, there's great spec. There's great spec with more X-Men. I mean, the X-Men stuff, there is so much that's getting set up right now by Hickman. It's going to be a really exciting era for the X.
What do you think?
What's that?
I mean, the question I continue to ask myself, because we've seen it happen before with Hickman's work. It was at least borrowed in substantial part for the Infinity War trilogy,
Sure.
For lack of a better description of it.
Okay.
Is House of X, Powers of 10, the primer for the MCU films? And if so, what are the books that you're looking at? I personally don't see it happening any other way. I feel like I'm about 5 issues in now, but really like 11 issues in now, and these issues were written like storyboards. They weren't written like your traditional comic books. There's so much detail that could have been sprinkled in between each one of these panels, not each one of these pages. And I think it's like all the ammunition that somebody in Hollywood who's an actual screenwriter would want. That being said, I don't know if they're going to want to tell this story exactly the same way. So for me, I'm more partial to, Uncanny X. Well, it's X-Men back then, but 96, the Moira McTaggart story, because I think that's a great plot device, than I am to say the first appearance of Gold Balls, because, I don't know, or even the first appearance of Nimrod.
It turned out to be a pretty integral character to the whole thing,
Well, there's 5 of them, right? Yeah, there's 5 of them that do that, and I don't want to get into too many of the details in case somebody's behind, but
well, we are. Yeah, spoilers, right? Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, in case somebody, I don't want to get into too much. I don't think they can glean anything from what we've said so far. But Nimrod, clearly is the big bad guy, at least for these 2 series. His book has not gone crazy.
Yeah,
hasn't at all.
That's a really strange, because it's,
and there was a lot of them out there. There's still a guy selling, I think, like packs of 10 or packs of 5. He's got a case of them.
Maybe the thought is, well, at the conclusion of this, he is going to be defeated. It's almost like, we were talking about, look, Spider-Man, the Benji Parker thing. I mean, is this character going to be part of the comic book world after this miniseries? I mean, I don't, there's, what do we?
Maybe, but I like the Benji Parker first appearance ratios and the number 1s more than I like that Spider-Girl 59 because he's a baby in it.
Well, there's
just kind of my take.
You talk about the first appearance of a character. It's in that, what is it? The MC2. I mean, it's still, you get a first appearance. You have a character that is being now developed by somebody that just came into comics to write this story, J.J. Abrams and his son. And I think that there's something that's very significant about it, depending on how this series goes and what happens afterwards. I think it's still pretty significant.
Yeah, so I'm not so much worried about the direction of the titles following House of X and Powers of X as I am trying to predict what these films are going to look like, because at the end of the day, people can hate it, but that's really what's driving numbers, and I think it's still going to be what's driving numbers 4 years from now.
Yeah, I mean, the film, I mean, look, so we talked about the 3 different, how it's going to splinter off into these 3 different sort of themes. And then, I mean, there's a ton of speculation on that. We haven't even talked about, what villains. I mean, we see Baron Zemo is confirmed to be one of the villains in the Captain America Falcon.
You're a big fan of the Thunderbolt series, correct?
Well, I mean, I definitely got a tip from a very very reputable source that the Thunderbolts, it even has a showrunner, and it makes sense because, you know, a month after, I put that out there about the Thunderbolts, Baron Zemo is confirmed as one of the villains that's going to be in the series. So,
and your kind of thought is what, that because the Young Avengers are going to be appearing, popping up individually, incrementally introduced in these television series.
Villain, they're all going to face their own villain in their series, and then there's going to be a culmination where it's going to turn into a Young Avengers series, and then there's going to be these. So it's like easing people into these introductions by using characters that we already know and we already like, and introducing new characters who will form into. Now, what is the next slate of Disney Plus shows? Moon Knight, She-Hulk, and in what direction or how that's going to relate to a Young Avengers team is still, who knows? I mean, who knows what's going to happen? But I think it's interesting that we could start specking on where these shows will go in terms of what villains are going to be, and what will occur after them. Young Avengers, Ultimates. We've talked about Ultimates in, coming in the MCU and how some of those teams are already established.
Yeah. Do you think you're a fan of Blue Marvel spec?
Yeah. I mean, it's
Century spec. I mean, are these books?
It's a reasonable spec. You hear some things about, they're going to, like, the Hulk Wolverine movie spec. I have a very difficult time believing something like that. Is there going to be
you and me both?
Yeah, I mean, It just does. It seems like it's kind of a one-trick pony in the sense that it's one issue. I mean, are we going to build a team around one issue? It seems just a little bit too.
Well, that was a series too, Hulk versus Wolverine.
Right, but what I'm saying is
the way that they're portraying it is that, well, that was where he first appeared in comics, so that's where he's first going to appear in a film. And I know what you're saying, but I just didn't want someone to freak out like they did about the Hulk 181 statement. I mean, they've explored that obviously a lot of different times, but for me, like yourself, I just don't see. I don't see necessarily Mark Ruffalo being the plot device to introduce Wolverine into the MCU.
Right.
I don't see it. For me, it's a Weapon X intro. That seems like a much more reasonable way to kind of introduce him in.
Mm-hmm.
Now, people are trying to like
Weapon X. I mean, if you start talking about the world and the Weapon X program and where it, introducing Phantom X, and you could get into the Hickman aspect of those stories. It would be like a decade and a half, though, of you don't think that there has to be an introduction if you're talking about House of X, Powers of X being sort of a, being a movie and it's a series of movies. There's not. I mean, keep in mind there has to be some kind of introduction, and I know they could sort of layer it in at the same time, but that's a dense story, dude. I mean, that is you sort of have to have a foundation. I know they say that you don't, but you sort of do.
Yeah, you
really understand it.
Sure.
Yeah.
That's an interesting question, right? Like, so it's written in a way that it's absolutely accessible to someone who's got no history with the X-Men whatsoever. But if you do, it becomes more than a good story. It becomes this like just brilliant kind of story. We talked, for example, a little bit about the Easter egg, for lack of a better description, in the dialogue between Jean Grey and Aurora.
Oh yeah, where she says it's been the same me all the time. Right. Yeah, that's right. I mean, he pulls from so deep, and it's like he dips into these time streams and he's pulling things out. It's just, I mean, you could read that book over and over again and pick out new things. Where is it? It's interesting to think, okay, so how is he going to end this? Because it's got to have, and we know it's going to continue on and split off into these different series, but what is the end of this series going to look like? That it's exciting because it better be damn good. I think a lot of people are hoping that.
I'm trying to figure out how you wrap it up at this point.
Right.
There's not much left.
It seems like, the X-Men seem very different, and of course that's the intention, to write them differently.
Very different.
Taken such a, it's always kind of, it's always been somewhat dark and somewhat heavy in the topics that it tackles. But man, this is it's like you almost don't recognize them and maybe that's the case. Maybe that's the point, because we're going to see these characters that are going to be, what we're seeing is characters that are combinations of characters in the future, and if they're going to keep on being reincarnated, what influence? Because when Hope is injecting the eggs, and I don't think this is a spoiler, but when she's injecting the eggs and she's, there's the Mr. Sinister symbol is on it. Like, what kind of characters are we getting from what comes out of those pots? They might look familiar, but what sort of intentions or who is behind, like, uploading their personalities and their motivations? It's a really exciting series, and you could already see hints of where they're going to go. Is it on X-Men #2? Is that the evil side of the other half of Krakoa on the cover? There's like this monster, but then there's also you have right. Is there what was the other aspect of it that I wanted to? Just a lot of fun.
Absolutely. Let me ask you some more questions before you.
I'm ready. Okay, I think we got to start wrapping it up.
Yeah, let me ask you at least one elaborately long question, and then I'll let you go. All right? Because it's a good one, and it's one I'm interested in, because really, rather than getting down into the weeds of like, you should buy this book, I kind of like to give people that watch the content that I generate, whether it's on the Weekend Update or here on the Comic Book Wars podcast, just kind of like lines of thinking, and then they can fill in the dots or draw the lines as they will from the dots that we paint. But where do you see MCU Phase 5 headed? So for me, I'm thinking about like the introduction of the Fantastic Four, the MCU Mutantverse, which we talked a little bit about. I see the cosmic stuff that we sort of talked about, Surfer, Galactus. I see Submariner coming in either with Black Panther 2 or FF, or maybe even his own standalone film, if they can get the right short up. And then this elaborate mutant universe with Wolverine, some iteration of the storyline that Hickman's telling in House of X and Powers of 10. And then I see that culminating in Secret Wars. I know we've discussed in the past that you're more apprehensive than me about it ending with Secret Wars, but what do you think?
We're missing out on, there's the whole, they haven't really even broached the whole Captain Marvel sequel yet. So Neil Adams was in negotiations about some of his intellectual property, specifically with Marvel, specifically Kree-Skrull War. And he has, he wrote, he illustrated the Kree-Skrull War storyline. And for years, they were going back and forth, Marvel and him, with proposals and reproposals about this storyline, and then when the whole Disney merger happened, and now this MCU is starting to expand, and then at one point, and it wasn't that long ago, Marvel said it pretty quickly. Hey, we're ready to close. What did you want? What was your last proposal? Reproposed offer. Okay, we'll take it. So he was surprised. He was surprised by how quickly that finally got locked down. That got resolved. So now they have that aspect. They have that storyline that they don't have to, worry about any sort of legal ramifications. So it does make sense that, there could be this Kree-Skrull war with some of what we've already seen introduced, and then with the X-Men coming in, they can do their introductions and their movies. You can move into a Shi'ar type of storyline where you could sort of have this massive,
it's interesting you say that,
epic where you have all these alien factions. You could get into the phalanx and the techno-organic virus. You get into any number of
Starjammers, Gladiator,
Starjam. Yeah, who wouldn't want to see? And they're kind of, there's an important distinction to make, that Marvel Comics and Marvel Studios are very different, are two different entities that really are not communicating that much information between each other. So there are times, and I've learned this more and more lately, and I actually really believed it when, David Gabriel, the sales manager of Marvel, said, look, we don't know what is going on with Marvel Studios. They keep that tight-lipped. So when you see these facsimiles come out, it's part of us go, oh, look at all these facsimiles coming out. They got to be doing it. They're coming out with a Quasar facsimile coming up in December. And it's like, I think that's Marvel's speculation, because James Gunn, 2 years ago, shows a picture of a like a tape deck that said Quasar on it. He's like, but I think that there are, we can't really look at stuff like that for speculation, because there's a lot of it that comes out. What was one facsimile that's coming out in December that I found really interesting? I'm trying to think of what it is. From a comic book speculation standpoint, not movie. Damn it, what is it? I should have wrote this stuff down. But as far as the movies go, to build up to this sort of epic space adventure with all these, the Nova Corps, we've heard about Nova for a while. We've seen a little bit of it, but definitely not to the degree that we could see like Imperial Novas and all this crazy cool. There is so much. And then you bring in all these different cosmic threats, like, you said the Beyonder or the Beyonders, or you have Galactus, of course.
God Doom. For
Emperor, that would be awesome. Emperor God Doom. That, by the way, that Sinister Secrets was introduced in Secret Wars 2, which is, interesting that he's pulling stuff from.
That's all I'm saying.
That's
his stuff.
But I'm just saying, as far as Phase 5, you'd have to go. This seems like almost like a reset, in the sense that, they're going into these different, Eternals. When you have Guardians of the Galaxy, we've heard that there's going to be Moondragon, which makes sense. It's Drax's daughter. They can develop more on the, the whole Drax storyline by introducing his daughter. And then there's, you have a whole new character with Quasar. And I would not turn down buying a Quasar. There was a female Quasar that was introduced, and like I said, I should have wrote this stuff down. I'm a little tired now. I'm not working on all cylinders, but I wouldn't be surprised to see some of these.
I think that was on your top 10, actually.
No, I don't think so. The Quasar one, Kincaid. Her name was Kincaid. I think her last name is Kincaid. No, it wasn't on my top. It was never on my top 10. There was no reason for it to be on the top 10. The top 10 is what's trending. That's not trending. But I would look at these different, versions of some of these characters for some of these upcoming movies, and characters that aren't as legacy characters of Marvel, like Thor. They're right. They're introducing a female Thor. So I think you're going to see some of their diversity plan in place with characters that they're introducing into this upcoming universe.
Well, before we go, I want to thank you. It means a lot
Thank
to
you.
all of us here at Comic Book Wars and the comicbookspeculation.com
Jimmy.
website, that particularly Jimmy, who, might I say, ran a tight ship in the chat. It was fun to watch him.
Oh,
and,
yeah? Jimmy
yeah,
running a
yeah.
tight ship.
Absolutely. He really
Well, guys,
did.
you know what? I'm happy you're all part of the community. Sorry, man. Was that noise there again?
It was a thing. There was a thing.
Sorry.
Yeah, it's
Not,
okay.
I mean,
It's for effect. I'm going to pretend like it's intentional.
Yeah. So, guys, you know, I'm happy everybody's a part of the community. I understand you all have your opinions about key collectors. Some of you love it, some of you don't like it. But you know, if you have feedback, you could send it. You could send it to me, and I'm happy to consider whatever it is that you feel is actually something that could be changed for the better. So, thank you, Jimmy and Nico, and who else is part of Comic Book Wars? John,
aka
thank you,
Sleepy.
John, Sleepy John. Yeah, all you guys, thank you, and hope you all have a great weekend.
Later, gentlemen.
Thank you.